reduce the level of load shedding to stage 2 this morning. But you'll remember on Sunday morning, the utility implementing stage 6 power cuts and attributed the decision to multiple trips at various sites, including the Camden Power Station. And the question is, will we ever see the end of rolling power cuts in South Africa? Independent energy analyst Clyde Mallinson and the founder and CEO of Masama Energy, Malusi Shabalala, will talk to us about this. Good morning, Clyde. Thank you very much for your time. So this weekend marked the second time this year that we experienced load shedding. At the end of January, we marked the end of that glorious 300-day run without power interruptions on the grid. But as you hear the apologies and the assurances that this will be the last of its kind from the minister, that we are in touching distance of the end, what were your takeaways?
Morning, Imam. My main takeaway is that everyone gets fixated on something called the energy availability factor, and they look at the average energy availability factor. And what we need to do is look at the instantaneous energy availability factor. So anything with an average implies a variation about that average. And in very simple terms, when the energy availability factor dips well below its average, we tend to have load shedding. And when it goes above its average, we're kind of safe. And so we should be looking at it in probabilistic terms. And so I plot things like looking at the energy availability factor, but more so looking at the variation of the energy availability factor. And if you do that, you can see that there are occasions or a chance, maybe a 5% chance, that it will dip below some level. And if it does that, we're very likely to have load shedding. So it's actually relatively easy to predict statistically. What statistics don't tell you is exactly when that's going to happen.
Right. So that's Clyde's take then. Malusi, let me bring you in to your thoughts on what you heard the minister say and the series of events that resulted in stage 6.
Good morning to you and your viewers. Thank you very much. So I think from our perspective, what we see is that Eskom is still operating within small margins of freedom, which is quite a challenge right now, especially because the infrastructure has been failing left, right, and center. So while they have the plan and they focused on making sure that the plants are operational according to what their expectations will be, there's also other ancillary equipment that have to do with the power station that haven't been focused on as they have on the plants. So you find that some of those equipment are the ones that are now failing, causing the entire plant to fail, while it's not necessarily a plant equipment. However, it's got something to do with, it definitely has everything to do with the entire system as a plant to be operational.
Talking to Clyde Mallinson and the founder and CEO of Masama Energy, Malusi Shabalala. So Clyde, I want to put this one to you. I mean, we spoke at the beginning about some of your broad level takeaways around why we found ourselves in the situation that we did, and Malusi also added his view on this. But I want to hear from you your concerns about the cascading impact of problems in the Eskom fleet. So, for example, this weekend it was all about Majuba. We heard that overloading and the tripping of a single transformer unit at Majuba could have caused a cascading series of trips of all generator units. So how risky is that, and what are your concerns when you heard that explanation?
I'm very concerned with the so-called domino or cascading tripping, but I'm also very confident that our system operator and the plans in place take cognizance of that. And so that's kind of why we had load shedding. The sudden severe stage 3 going to stage 6 so rapidly was in a direct response to the events that took place. So at least that's working. It needed, when you have a shortage of generation suddenly, and you've got no emergency reserves to step into the breach, as it were, you have to go to load shedding, and you have to do it rapidly. There isn't time to say, oh, we're going to have stage 6 load shedding in 6 hours' time. It literally is, we've got stage 6 load shedding now. So you have certain automatic responses that the system has, where it almost takes over from manual planned load shedding and says, listen, now we need to cut off X amount very rapidly. And that's kind of what happened. But what concerns me a bit is that, when I say it concerns me, I track these things quite closely. And I noticed in December, for the first 2 weeks in December, we used a lot of diesel. And that surprised me, because it's normally a low usage month, December. I understand that we do more maintenance in December, but it just sparked a flag, because the diesel OCGTs running at night in particular, not just at peak times, is always a signal that we're short of energy. And I thought that's a bit odd. And then on New Year's Day, of all days, the diesel OCGTs and the IPPs ran at very high levels. And once again, that seemed a bit odd. And then just finally in this week, before we had load shedding, in the run-up week, the diesel OCGTs and the IPP OCGTs were running pretty much flat out 24/7, and they can't do that. And when I say they can't do that, they can't refuel or restock diesel fast enough to allow them to run flat out 24/7. And so we should probably have had a lower stage of load shedding a week earlier, just to give us a bit of reprieve and to allow us not to flatten our diesel stocks and to flatten our pumped hydro storage stocks.
Yeah.
So the signs were all there. And as I say, when you hit a period when you dip below the average EAF significantly, that's basically when you have load shedding. And that's exactly what happened.
So, Melissa, you were nodding when you heard that, and I'd like to hear your perspective on that. And for us who don't understand it from a technical perspective, we just think, well, if we're using a lot of diesel, that means we're relying on diesel and not on pure power generation, if that's a correct understanding. So just share with us why you were in agreement with Clyde there.
So our traditional fleet in South Africa uses coal, and the OCGTs that he's talking about, Clyde is talking about, is plants that use diesel to produce power. So ideally, you would want to use the coal or the other renewable resources, because diesel is quite expensive. And you also cannot hold certain reserves and amounts of reserves of diesel at a particular time, because you want to ensure that and from a safety perspective and all other matters that are concerning that. But if you are going to use more diesel, then it means the other ones that are supposed to be operational are not operational. So right. it tells a story that something is amiss. If we are saying, because OCGTs are used traditionally for peaking time. So once the country is at peak load, that's when you use OCGTs, so to cover for that right. portion. So if you are running the plants that are supposed to be peaking plants all day, every day, then it means that there's a problem.
So we talked about broadening the energy mix in South Africa. Melusi, I'll ask you this one. It's added more volume to this ongoing debate around Eskom being the primary and the sole provider of energy in South Africa. Yeah. We know that Ramaphosa said last year already that he was a firm believer in the renewable energy mix, that we would see an exponential share of renewables in South Africa's energy mix. But how much progress has there credibly been in REAP, which is the Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program? It's been 13, 14 years since it started?
Yeah. So REAP, I think the bid windows leading up to bid window 4 has been significantly successful. And then I think what we've seen afterwards is that there had been a lot of challenges because it's become more competitive. So you find projects that have been awarded to procure power from, but they are not reaching financial close. And also one of the key challenges that we are facing is that projects that have been awarded post bid window 5 have significant challenges in terms of grid connectivity. So areas like Northern Cape, where there's the best solar resources in the country, we are struggling with grid connectivity because there's not enough infrastructure to evacuate that power.
So these would be what, the transmission lines?
Yes, the transmission lines, simply because of how our system has been designed from back in the day, where a lot of the generation capacity was in the Mpumalanga region, and then you find that transmission lines are coming from that area down towards the country. So now you are building infrastructure in the Northern Cape, where traditionally the grid was planned to receive power. So now you want to inject that power back to the grid so you can produce, you can transmit it upstream, and those are some of the challenges that we are facing, that there's not enough capacity. So while there has been significant successes with REAP, but there's now challenges where we cannot further build projects or power projects so that it can actually be transmitted to various parts of the country because of the limitations on the transmission infrastructure.
Clyde, I'd like your comment on this as well, and the inability of our energy infrastructure or the grid right now to be able to accommodate what is available, and some of the planning and adjustments that need to be made in a way that will significantly, securitize our energy provision.
Yeah, well, just the first point, there's two aspects to this. The first point is that the sun shines rather well all over South Africa, although people in Gauteng might dispute that for the last week or so.
Yes.
But the beauty of solar in particular is that it's distributed energy generation, and you don't have to put all the solar just where the best solar resource is. The solar resource in parts of Mpumalanga, for example, in winter are better than what they are in the Northern Cape, believe it or not, and it's winter where we often have a shortfall. So that's just the first point, is we should get away from thinking about only building large plants far away from where the electricity is going to be used, and rather build many more smaller plants distributed across the whole country. So that's what first point. The second point is the transmission lines. Think of them as roadways, and think of the transmission line from the Northern Cape as if it was the M1 between Tshwane and Johannesburg. If you go there at 2 o'clock in the morning, there's no traffic at all. So the line is available. So just as a simple example, if we put more battery energy storage in the Northern Cape, we could take that surplus solar generated in the daytime that couldn't be evacuated and evacuate it when the sun goes down. And that combination of solar and storage would still be way, 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 way less expensive than burning diesel in the OCGTs. It doesn't even come close. So there can be much better utilization of the existing transmission simply by injecting storage into the system, as well as allowing for something called curtailment. And that would be, we overbuild solar and wind in the Northern Cape. On certain occasions, we can't evacuate it, but for much of the time, we can evacuate much more than we would have evacuated had we not overbuilt wind and solar, if you see what I'm getting at. So you almost have a cup too full, but the little bit that gets spilt is offset by the value of being able to make better use of that infrastructure for 90% of the time.
Just a quick follow-up on that, and it combines with what you said earlier about there having been a spark flag back in December with our diesel consumption and so on, that there should have been some early warnings that perhaps Eskom didn't pay attention to, which resulted in what we saw this weekend. And then, as you're saying, we need a little more ingenuity or agility around how, and I want to use the word reticulate, although I don't know if that's the correct word or not, in low traffic times to get what we're getting, for example, from the Northern Cape back into the system. Is Eskom, because, we look at their plans and we think, okay, these plans sound, quite sound, and look at the proof. We've been without load shedding for so many days. But it sounds like there are small wins that could be made by Eskom, which could have exponential benefits to the system that they're missing. Would that be correct, Clyde?
Yeah, look, I think what one of the things I've noted is that the different agencies working on these issues are not always in sync. So Eskom have in fact proposed a so-called curtailment regime for wind and solar from, let's say, from areas that can't evacuate at certain times. And they took a proposal to NERSA. And I can't remember the exact reasons, but NERSA kind of said, we're kind of really busy. I don't want to say what NERSA said, except that they kind of rejected that, because when it comes to someone has to curtail if you're oversupplying and the grid isn't able to take it, there's arguments about who should pick up that tab. Should it be the IPP who's built? Should it be society in general? Should it be Eskom? And because of sort of agreement on that. And I know I've advised some IPPs where the IPP has said, I want to build a solar plant and a battery in the Northern Cape, and if I have to curtail at certain times, I'll take that on the chin, because I still think it's worth it, because I've worked out it's only going to be 5% of the time.
All right.
And so there hasn't been enough movement and urgency with some of the regulatory environment.
Okay. Clyde, thanks. And again, thank you to both of you for being so on your toes. Just a final quick one to you, Malusi. So there's a plan. The minister laid it out on Sunday. Medupi Unit 4 coming back online in March later this year. Kusile Unit 6 as well. Is our plan strong? Are we going to be in the same situation we were this weekend soon?
I think we'll have to just take what the minister is telling us, because obviously he's coming from an informed perspective. And I think the key thing here is that we are still down on generation capacity, and this is what we need to focus on as a country so that we can be able to overcome the challenges that we have.
Yeah, this is by no means the epilogue in South Africa's energy story. Thank you to the both of you for sharing your perspectives. It helps us to understand what happened and what we can expect going forward. That was, of course, Malusi Shabalala and Clyde Mallinson. Really appreciate their time and analysis this morning. We've got more for you at the top of the hour. We're loading your 10 o'clock. Stay